25, and I was riding Husqvarna all the time. I think that there's only a couple enduros that I ever rode Penton in. Now that one there is a BMW.
I know.
As a matter of fact, this is Germany.
6 days Germany?
Yeah. This is 1962, 6 days Germany. Oh, this thing is going to get hairy now.
This is your 68 Penton team. Where was 68 ISDT would have been?
How's your handwriting, more?
Not bad. Somebody want me to write? Well, I'll print on pencil on the back of the picture, you mean?
Yeah, pencil.
Oh yeah, I can neatly print. That's what they recommend, use pencil on those.
Well, you can use ballpoint, but you got trouble, you tend to press hard and it puts creases in it.
You know what I think this is? I think this could have been 6 days in the United States. Does it say
That's
that?
68. It's
Or 68?
yeah. Photo sport. I'm trying to. Italy? You guys?
It was 68. It was Italy.
Yeah, it's Italy. That's
I guess
Italian.
Dave. Oh yeah, Dave was among us. Yeah, that's right. This was our boss team in Italy, 68.
That was your first miss. Look at that old airbox.
Oh yeah.
Chris, Jeffrey, and I put those stickers on. I can't tell you how many of those
We had
airboxes.
rear wheel sprocket, rear wheel trouble there. Brake trouble.
Air cleaner trouble.
That's where I tore my knee up, got infection, and went up to Monsdorf to the 250 narrowed across, and that guy's had my knee all infected. And Donna was along there. As a matter of fact, Donna went through a lot of our 6 days. Yeah, you found that one. That's quite a. Let me see some of those other photos.
There's a whole bunch of stuff. Here. Oh, set them in there.
Yeah. Set that down.
See, this was 6 days Germany here. On the table? Sure. Give me a stronger one.
You probably found it hard to find me on a Penton, because in those days, a lot. Even
Just 62. Germany, 6 days, 62.
You got marked as a BMW, or
Huh?
that's BMW, isn't it?
Can't miss that. It's got the thing on. Yeah, but it's got a aerial front end.
Mark that down.
Is that what it is, John? Aerial? You guys put an aerial front end on
I
it?
believe that is me.
Yeah, that's no. There's some of you in there, but not that one. That's Dan Young. Yeah, that's Dan Young.
This one here, I can just tell the way he's going over. That's Leroy.
You always look clean.
There's Munganas.
Munganas. M-U-N.
There's the Lord.
Munganas.
The Lord just
Oh,
called me last night. got out from triple bypass.
Guy in the middle?
No, in the end.
This guy here?
Yeah,
Lavery?
yeah, he just got out of a triple bypass. He called me from his hospital bed just about 8 miles north of Heathrow.
Isn't he the one that had Wassel?
No, that Teddy Wassel?
He had nothing to do with Wassel?
No, but he was a competitor. He had Lavery Motor Factors.
Okay.
Teddy Wassel passed away. Yeah,
Lavery, right.
yeah, this is Tom. The boys did a lot of the ride. Hey, Jerry West would have a lot of nice pictures. Here,
Boy. That was a BMW 250. Ha ha. You have R69S piston in that one? I think.
see,
Yeah.
most of these photos, so many of them came from Jerry West. Although he was kind of.
There's a few pictures of you at the house yet on a Husky. That would have been the same era.
Teddy Swartz and myself.
What was Teddy Swartz? He was just a...
Oh, he was a ardent rider. He started riding Penton years ago, and of course he's my age, and he's still riding. And he goes to every 6 days. He's been to every 6 days for years. But
That's your Italian team, 68. That's good.
it's the Italian team in '68 in San Pellegrino. I think that looks to me like Chafee.
Flip Chafee?
I think let me see that again.
Somebody named Dan. Looks like there's a Dan on the side of his helmet. Dan.
Where the hell do you see Dan?
Right on the side of that helmet. Hey, I had eye surgery. You had knee surgery? I had eye surgery. Say that name again. Italian San what? San in Italy?
San Pellegrino, where the spring water comes from.
So maybe say it's Don on there.
That was your Voss team? ISDT?
ISD, United States Voss team. And that year, we didn't have a trophy team.
Oh. Well, it's something to do because it
Wait a minute, we must have had a trophy team because that was '68, and we had a trophy team in Zakopane. So the trophy team that was when we parted with the company of Husqvarna. I mean, the argument started.
Mm.
See, I took Munganas from the trophy team. Now the trophy team, you got a picture of the trophy team in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. That was Husqvarna.
Mm-hmm.
The year before the Penton.
Okay. So that's Mungadas, that's Tom. Who's the guy next to you?
That's Winters.
Leroy.
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
So what was the split up between you and Husqvarna? Because of that event, or just a
Yeah,
series of things?
that really started the friction, because, and it all started prior to that. Really, this 125 thing was always bugged me, because I wanted Husqvarna to build a 125,
Mm-hmm.
and this started right after I started to import Husqvarna. And I said, I had been to 6 days and I could see that the small bike could perform right along with the big bike,
Mm-hmm.
in rough terrain. So, and really be competitive. So I said, well, that's the bike to start, young Americans on. And so Husqvarna, they fought that tooth and nail because they were a world champion on motocross. They said, America doesn't want a small motorcycle. America wants everything big.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Zakopane, Poland, that was a year before the Penton, we rode Husqvarnas, and I ran into KTM people. And there was a young engineer from there who was riding a KTM. KTM didn't make motorcycles then, but this young engineer built his own motorcycle and rode under the name of KTM, that's all. He was a privateer. That was Ziggy Stuhlberg. And incidentally, just last week, Jack was over to KTM and ran into Ziggy Stuhlberger again after 30-some years, and Jack says he's about the same way, and he's now their head engineer, and he has been designed all the KTM engines that's come out of the
Yeah,
factory.
Jack was talking about that at some of the meetings.
And but he was the young engineer that I met, and so forth. And he says, "Well, why don't you come by KTM?" Well, on our way back from Zakopane, Poland, well, we came through. That was through Yugoslavia. If you look at the map, you'll see that to
Right.
get to Austria from Poland, you can go through Czechoslovakia, a corner of Czechoslovakia, and end up in Austria. So, at any rate, well, that's what we did, and then we stopped at the factory. Well, that was one contact that and it was a kind of a coincidence in a way. There was a DP here in Cleveland that had come from KTM or from Mattighofen, Austria, and he knew of KTM. So it was about 2 or 3 weeks after that, we returned to the States. Then I took this guy from Cleveland and went back to Austria and met the head of the KTM people. We got on a plane and went down to Milan show and put a bunch of parts together with my ideas, ordered them, and we took them back to the factory, and then they started building. They built that proto model, and I went back over there the next month, looked at this and everything, and gave him $6,000 and said, "Make me 6 of them." And that was this first 6 that came in right after the first of the year. And that started the Penton. But all this time, you see,
So were those 6 proto models or production models?
They
were
I would
proto.
say they were proto.
They weren't production yet. Those
They're-
were first, right?
No, they were proto models.
Right.
And the frames came out of the original. Yeah, no, he built the frames. But the rest of the stuff was.
Well, didn't they build the Hansa?
They had been building the Hansa.
That was their main machine they built.
Well, there wasn't main. It was the Hansa came by. That was the first motorbike or little motorcycle they built. And the reason they built the Hansa was for Fritzie Dengel in Cleveland.
He can import them and sell them
Yeah,
here.
and he imported to Cleveland, and they did. That was his affiliation with KTM, and none of it. They didn't sell for nothing. But Fritzie came out there. That's how I met him. He came out to sell me, and he kept saying, "Hansa, Honda. Oh, you should sell millions of them. Hansa, Honda. You know."
Mhm.
Well, hell, tell me all about that. And they weren't put together. They were.
I've read a few.
And,
So on those first production bikes, those first 6 they built, you
Well-
pretty much specified what was
yeah.
was supposed to be in there.
And he just, when he put them together, he basically took some of the parts that he had for the Hansa, those cast aluminum parts, and then with a air cleaner in there that everything leaked, you know,
Right.
and so forth. Well, at any rate, they were experimental. Leroy. And then we rode those down, and we did pretty good with them down. And the first time, there was 5 of us, I guess, rode them down to Daytona, the alligator and that. Leroy, he reworked his, but we had spark plug problem with him because of the leaky exhaust things,
Intake.
air cleaners and so forth. Then we started the production, and the first production still had that air cleaner system on it.
Mhm. Still does.
Yeah. And boy, I wouldn't trust it with a 6. Well,
Well, then you went with that Husky style airbox.
yeah. Then we went with no,
It was the same
we put that
round.
round thing on.
That's like Husky had originally.
Well, yeah, I guess it was,
Mhm.
yeah.
Then you put the leather shroud over it for
Yeah.
mud running. It was the greatest thing going at the time.
But, we tried and we tried, but and along with it, everybody worked because the thing performed pretty good, you know. I mean, it was a performance bike yet. And the Japs had kind of caught up to the performance, so hell, there was a lot of guys winning on it. Yeah, but the thing that slowed everything down was Trunkenfeld says you can't sell them for that price and all, so forth. But that bike, when we brought it out, we were selling for $600 and $700. That was a lot of money in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Husqvarna then was selling for, well, my first Huskies I was sold for $995. Then they moved up to a little over 1,000. They still hung around $11.95 for a long time. Yeah,
I had a 360.
yeah. But
Well, what was Husqvarna then? They were just making strictly large bore bikes then at that time.
250 and up.
250 and up.
360, 400 originally. And then they got into the new generation. They went to a 450, and then they went the other direction. Then they went to 125.
But that was in
72.
early 70s, yeah.
72.
Husqvarna's
Finally,
administration and Husqvarna Engineering killed their company, killed the Husqvarna. Husqvarna could have always, in engineering, had the lead, but the engineers, they were stubborn. They had to, basically, one of the most competitive bikes going was the automatic Husqvarna, you know.
Yeah, they came out with that in, what, 73, 74?
73,
Yeah.
the first one
And
came out.
it was not reliable. For a champion, it was reliable because he'd take it apart after every enduro.
Mm-hmm.
You see, but for the average, if you're average guy, you couldn't depend on it. But they did, like Burleson did a lot of winning on him. He could make him work like a charm. Good buddy. And so, what's his name down here, State? The other guy that was so competitive on him.
From Ohio,
Yeah, I think he was from Ohio.
Burleson, and
Oh, hell, yes, he was from Ohio, and he won a lot of races on that automatic. But at any rate, what is it, the storm all over? But at any rate, been sold, talking to Reuben for years, and he told us the problem that existed, the problem why it wasn't fixed, because of the young engineers in there, and they just were set in their ways, so forth. And then, after that, see, the Husqvarna didn't become competitive, and the Husqvarna was bought by Electrolux. The whole situation, they didn't want nothing to do with motorcycles anymore. You see, and then they sold the motorcycles, and then they sold the chainsaws. You see, one of the first chainsaw that ever came into the country is sitting on the shelf over here.
180S.
I don't know what it is.
I had one.
But
We
it's painted a different color.
had a warehouse full of
It's
them.
painted a different color, and the reason it's painted a different color is Farnstrom painted it, took it to Canada for a display, and he thought yeah, white would be better or something.
Oh.
So. But that was the basis of the start of the Penton, and then everything followed was riders follow-up, About every month, there was problems in the shifting and this, and I would take problems over there, and then it became gear problems. Hell, I was going over there with suitcases full of gears. Then there was a clutch problem. That was when we were really building. The clutch was the most pathetic thing.
That must have been kind of interesting going through customs and stuff with suitcases full of parts, huh?
Yeah, but in those days it wasn't so.
That didn't give you a bad time then.
As a matter of fact, when we started going over there, when I started 6 days, I rode over on a Super Constellation. They didn't have the jets yet. I'll never forget that.
Wow.
But
The Penton Imports picture right there, it shows Husqvarna and Penton. What was the last year that you were involved, that you were involved with Husky? When did you sell your interest in Husky? When you were on Broadway?
68.
68.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had them for 3 years?
I took Husky on not 68, 78.
Oh, that long?
Oh yeah.
So you,
I took Husky. Yeah, I took Husky on in
it's in the early mid
Wait a minute.
60s.
in '67.
Okay,
It was
67.
the first imports that I had.
All right.
It was late '66, beginning of '67, when the first ones came in, and yeah, we had put that team together in that time, because I got equal shipment with Edison Dye. But at any rate, I guess maybe it was 70. No, it was 78, I think.
So when Lato and them were running it on Broadway, you still owned the...
Yeah. Because I set up Husky on Broadway. See?
Right, in the old
That's
grocery
right.
store.
That's right. And then when Husky moved out of there,
To Tennessee.
Tennessee in '78, you see.
That's when you sold your interest.
Sold my interest, yeah.
Okay.
So I had it about 10 years.
So I remember your first 250.
But that was the reason that I got out of the Husky business, is because of the friction. And then they said, you're pushing Pentons. And finally, when we came with the 175 and the 250, that was enough.
Mm-hmm.
That was enough for the Swedes. But the Swedes were like the Italians. They weren't business people at all. And it's funny, the Swedish executives or industry weren't business people. But I got news for you. You take Lindstrom and Lars Larson, every one of those Swedes, Torsten, fantastic business guys. Tight, Jesus Christ,
And I went drinking with them. I think I bought the whole night.
That would be
You probably enjoyed every minute of it too.
And they,
Well, see, Gunnar was in charge of the race team for quite a long time, the motocross team.
they always call them the White Jews.
Yeah. We called them
Always.
squareheads.
And they're funny people.
Mm-hmm.
In any war, they sit on the fence.
Always have.
Always sit right on the fence. It all depends which way it goes, and that's the way they play the game, you see. But
That's called a win-win.
You got it.
but I got them to thank them for my 5 carbon fiber discs in my back anyway.
Swedish steel, huh?
Yeah. And so forth. But that was spelled how the Penton started. And then there was a lot of stories after that. But you can take people like Winners and well, there's so many across the country that, worked at these, sold them and worked at them. And Dave Munganas, good, strong people that gave him the push, so forth. That's what it took to make it. But the reason it came to with me, came to an end was Trunkenpolks. He just wouldn't listen to nothing. He was a hard guy to guide, and he didn't believe in doing it. He wanted to run everything.
He's the one that always came over here. He's over here a lot.
No, Trunky only came over. I'd say came to the States maybe six times. Or
I must
so.
have seen him all six because he was the man I met, and
Yeah.
he was even at one of the dealer schools, I think.
Yeah, he used to went to the dealer school.
Mm-hmm.
Our dog, our German Shepherd, chased him down through the field here at the orchard and scared the shit out of him. I got news for you. You know what he did? He went home and the first thing he did is get a big German Shepherd. He had that till he died.
No kidding.
Wolf, he called him. Wolf. Never forget that. That was his protection from then on. He figured that the goddamn dog was going to chase him. He was going to own a dog like that to chase somebody else.
Like you when you came over.
So it was really, but the guy, at least he did play the game with me and so forth, and that's how the whole thing got started and so forth. But if he'd have stuck to his guns, but he got going so good, and then he saw the radiator business. That broke him. That killed the company. Then it was just about 78, 9 that the motorcycle industry took another dump. And in that era, you could be wondering what's going to happen to motorcycle off-road racing and motorcycles in general.
Yes.
In Europe. So Eric was very flush by that time. He was going good, and it was the radiators had come on the machines, and he started to buy radiators from Nippon Dunstall.
That's the radius for the motorcycles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then Eric, in the things looked so good, but here comes what he looked like the downfall of a motorcycle. So he found a better market for his radiators to buy them in Germany. And they were charging him like hell in Germany. And Nippon Denso had been making them cheaper on production. So what's the best thing to do? Build your own radiator, isn't it? So he started to build radiators, and pretty soon he was furnishing radiators. He started a little factory right adjacent. He was building radiators for all the Italians. Like he was building for almost all the bikes in Europe, because the guys that were building, the Germans who were building it, were big radiator companies.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as a little motorcycle business, that's why they got so much for it, because it was a limited business. So Eric got in them, but then that was okay. And if he'd stopped there, KTM would have taken a whole different thing. But if you can build motorcycle radiators, and you got the automobile industry coming like hell, why not build a big plant and go into automobile radiator building? And that's what he did. And shit, those big radiator fellas put him out of business like nobody's business. Bankrupt him.
Wow.
And main one was BMW, because he had been doing machine work for BMW for several years, crankcases and so forth on the CNN machines, along with his motorcycle engines. He was jobbing BMW says, build us radiators? Sure, we'll buy them. You know where they bought them? Where they could buy them the most reasonable.
Nippon Denso.
No, they bought them from a German outfit, I guess, and Italy. Big Italian radiators. And that really brought, because he built a real big, sophisticated new radiator shop.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up in the end, the company went bankrupt, went into receivership in the Vienna banks. The Vienna banks sold off the radiator business, the radiator company, to an Italian company, a radiator company. They sold off the moped and bicycle business to another Italian company, and they still had the motorcycle business left. So they went to all of, and they wanted to keep it going, otherwise that'd have been the end of the KTM motorcycle.
Right.
So they went to the people that were administering it and asked them if they would buy a portion into it, just invest in it. This was the Viennese banks. And they did. They got most of the distributors, Struckemeyer and later Ferrioli, in Europe, and they all chipped in. And then they got Coleman. Coleman put in $15,000. They all chipped in so they'd have an interest in it. And they made Coleman Che the president, and he ran it for a year. By that time, they found a Swiss outfit that purchased it from the banks. And when they purchased it, they bought out those guys. And Coleman, I think he made over $100,000 on his $20 grand investment. And that's what. Then they had money, and they started to put money into KTM.
What year did it go into receivership?
Well, it must have been about 1989.
About 89.
Yeah.
Okay.
87. Yeah, I would say 88 or 89, right in there.
Yeah, and up until that time, it was gradually kind of dying out with the motorcycle end of it anyways.
Oh, yeah.
It was really tough.
It was having that troubles with it. But then there was a time for the States, there was a time when Lato took it over and our dollar got strong again. You know,
Mm-hmm.
then it did pretty good.
Right now, they're doing great.
And
Oh yeah, it's just taking this long that they're getting
well,
noticed. And
what's doing the dollar again.
Okay.
See, that's what put me up and down, bankrupt me really, was that dollar business. You know, I had millions of dollars worth of bikes and the containers coming and ordered, and then then that was in '72. That was when I took the first blow in '72, and I think I had about $2 million floating.
Mm-hmm.
And Nixon, yeah, it was Nixon devaluated the dollar February 12th or something in 1972. And he devalued the dollar by 10%. That meant that it took me 10% more to buy Joyce marks or Austrian shillings.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a 10% beating on anything that I had owed, see. So that was people didn't know this was going on, but that just took the vibrance out of the company. Hell, we were flying high until then. And not understanding it. Now today, it would be a lead pipe cinch for me because I would have purchased forward, on the commodities. And I later learned all of that dealing in gold and silver, but that was when people didn't realize what really was happening to the whole thing. And
well, we also had a big problem then too.
And what gave me a boost out of that was selling Husqvarna. You know, I gained a little bit there, got a little bit more breathing space. See, but it's very interesting that I never made big money on the thing, but that was the motorcycle business.
Well, back in 75, 74, 75 was also a tough time because inflation was going nuts too at that time. It was out of control. And
This here inflation business, people don't understand it. It's crazy. It's crazy. When you kick your money free and don't have nothing to support it but confidence, you know. That's what it's all about. There's so much dollars around today. If the people didn't have confidence in it, the whole thing would crap out.
They just print more.
They'd just print more.
no, that's what they were doing back in the 70s. They kept
Well, see,
printing
they
it out,
don't.
and there was nothing behind it.
The problem is, or it isn't a problem. The gracious of it all is that you don't need to print it. All you have to do is run your fingers and create it electronically, and we recognize electronics.
Mm-hmm.
You see, we can, and all they do is that's what goes on, and it'll always work. I don't know. I say someday it won't work. But do you ever stop and think? Now get this. Petroleum yesterday hit the lowest point, same price that it was in 1980.
I know it's been hitting low, but I didn't realize it hit that low.
Yeah. Now, think what your dollar would buy in 1980. Think what your dollar buys today, and think why gasoline is so cheap. It is so cheap, and you know what? These people are out here with looking at a penny and a penny here and a penny there, and a whole goddamn bunch of them are nuts like a... You see?
Yeah.
And there's a reason for it. They don't know what to do with the boil off. Hell, the car, everything's made of plastic today and fiberglass and everything else, and they need those resins and they need all of the byproducts. And where do they come from? They come from, the first thing they come from is petrol, they're a petrochemical product, and the first thing that goes off is your fuels. Right. So we're here, they're almost ready to give us fuel, and the only reason fuel's any cost at all is taxes. In Europe, it costs the same, but fuel is 3 times as expensive. Why? Because they tax it 3 times as much as we do. You see?
Mm-hmm.
We play funny games over here, and I think it isn't good. And the reason I think it isn't good, I think we should tax more, you know, and slow the people down. Our ecologies would be better. You see, yeah. These people wouldn't be wasting so much. Jesus Christ, I think I can tell you so much waste, and I don't know why we don't legislation. This guy's sitting here, he shouldn't even hear it, but why don't we legislate that we're going to have school buses? The people are allocated to ride the school bus. It's mandatory they get on the goddamn school bus, or the school bus isn't going to be run. These people can all get their own goddamn automobiles and haul the kids to school. Mm-hmm. That should be mandatory. This is a bunch of crap. I watch every one of these buses. Then I had a experience with a grandson of mine, taking him to Fireland School and watching the school buses come in, and watches a flood of cars come in. Those kids come in and play funny games. The parents come in playing funny games, bringing their kids to school, and here are these beautiful school buses, all safe and everything. They got to meet safety standards and everything. Come in with 25, not more than 25% loaded, and they're running from South Amherst to Firelands back and forth like it's out of this world. And all you have to do is see this. And I just experienced this was news to me, but here comes a school bus from the Firelands area, not from the school, but from that area. Right behind it and right in front is a whole flood of cars stampeding to get to South Amherst. And then pretty soon the whole flood goes back with the bus empty. It's unbelievable how they shuttle these things back and forth. And this is what we're doing with this cheap fuel.
The bus that comes over here, picks up your granddaughter, takes her to school, the high school bus, I think there's 90 to 100 kids eligible to ride that bus that should be on from grade 7
You would have
to
some
12.
figures on this.
Okay? And that bus is about 40 kids. That means there's 60 kids that are getting rides from mom and dad or their own vehicles. And that student lot is full of cars. And we're not talking, the car's better than what you and I drive.
Oh, it's, yeah.
And they belong to those kids.
And
Go figure.
Well,
You see?
keeps the economy running.
it keep, yeah, that's what
Yeah.
everyone says. It keeps the economy running.
Cheap fuel.
But there's,
You cut off that fuel altogether, and I'll tell you, this whole country just ground right to a halt.
Mhm.
These people would go
No,
nuts.
you don't think
because-
anything. If someone said, John, you gotta go to the east side of Cleveland, we need some parts for a machine, you just go jump in your car and you go. When you look at our superhighways, you look at our interstates, and you look at our bridges across these interstates, you know what they're designed to handle? Troop transports and
Yep.
tanks. Our highways, when they design a bridge, they don't look at what size tractor trailer is going to go over that. They don't look at what size bus is going to go over that. They're going to look at their military machinery that would be hauled over that and the bridge clearances to clear it. That's what the standards are set for.
well, today, those standards, most of those standards are necessary for what we're doing with them too, with our commercial freight.
Sure, but that's secondary. The primary reason for this big push for highways was Eisenhower.
Right.
He wanted all these.
Oh, in those days, oh, you're talking about,
But to this day, they still have that same mindset. Okay, we got to make sure this bridge is able to handle X amount of
well,
tonnage.
that was an offspring from the Autobahns.
Mhm.
You see, basically, they were still looking for war support, you know, and that, I agree with you on that. And the Autobahns were designed that way, you know.
Hitler knew how to move stuff.
Oh, he knew how the Germans were, and I think even today, as I've seen it, the Germans have surpassed in design and so forth, have been ahead of us in the transportation. God, when I see what they had on the drawing boards that they never achieved, you know, the Autobahn to Villach, you know, they hadn't finished the Autobahn from Salzburg to, you know, the Autobahn stopped in Salzburg at one time. It didn't go on to Vienna. And then later on they ran it on to Linz, and then to Vienna. And the Autobahn from Salzburg to Villach, in Italy. Well, Villach's on the border, Austrian border to Italy. That wasn't completed until way to 1980. 82 that was completed, I think. And hell, the Euro Bridge, they hadn't built a bridge. Oh, that's a good thing to remember. When we went to San Pellegrino, the Euro Bridge hadn't been built.
Is that right?
Oh, Jesus. Leroy and I, and you have Donna tell about us racing through Innsbruck and over to Bologna, over those mountains. We each had a rent-a-car, you know. And Munganas, myself, and Leroy, we had a race across those mountains. Donna will tell you all about that, you know. But the Euro Bridge wasn't there. And I saw all of the Autobahns and Motorstradas and motorways built up in Europe after the war. Because I came right at that time, when Europe was getting over.
That was what, late 60s, early 50s, or?
That was the early 60s.
Okay.
Early 60s. It all, as a matter of fact, it all started, well, the Autobahn, they started to move in 1960. They hadn't done anything but get all their bridges and everything on the original Autobahns,
Right.
which were very minimal. They had the Autobahn, the Autobahn from Salzburg to Regensburg to yeah. They just had a ring around there, and then they had the Autobahn to Berlin, but that was been cut off, so forth, and and then they had the Autobahn to Hamburg. That's all. And it stopped in Salzburg, and Frankfurt it stopped. I always took, yeah. So, but believe it or not, all of those Autobahns they built then were on Hitler's plans, or on the German plans. All those were all laid out, and most of the engineering had been done, the way I understand it. Had been done.
That's the same thing what they did here with our highway system was the same thing. They, in the late 50s, early 60s, when they laid it all out, they're still finally completing roads that were put off.
Yeah, they did. And most of that was laid out in 54,
right.
55, and that, and so forth. All of this, and some of it they never completed. They never completed. 80 stopped right out here in a frog pond, and 80 was supposed to go right on through to Toledo, and so forth. As a matter of fact, 80 was originally planned to take over the turnpike. I mean, there'd be two highways there. Then naturally the turnpike, when all this business started and they had so much trouble, well, then that was the end of 80 right up here.
I was talking to Norm, he was talking about showing me all his family, they owned land and stuff, farms and stuff, and what was your grandmother, you said that she had, and I said, well, yeah, they number one, split by the railroad, probably split it in half, and then they built the Route 2 through there, that split it in half some more.
Yeah. They were going to, how was it? Yeah, they had Route 2 going down through here one time. And instead of, they had it coming down somewhere in the area 254 here.
It's going to cut through Lorraine.
Yeah, it's going to cut through Lorraine.
Wished it would have.
Yeah. But when that Route 2 went in, it didn't do Lorraine any good, and Lorraine then didn't wise up. So that was the end of Lorraine. Lorraine will never recover to a vibrant city again. And it's quite obvious because of two things. Looking forward, you see, the minute that happened, they should have lobbied for a highway to come in 611. You wouldn't be familiar with that. No. But 611, it meets Route 2 right out there in Avon. And it comes directly into Lorraine, you see. So if you're coming from the east, you see, you have a direct access to the city of Lorraine. And they never put that in. It's just a little old road and so forth. So actually, then the next way to get to Lorraine is Route 57. Route 57, when you come into it, where do you come? Right into the steel mill.
Right, dead smack there.
Yeah.
You see? So there wasn't any planning there. And then the next one was Broadway and so forth. But to start it off, see, if they'd have put that highway in, that'd have started building up the center of Lorraine. They'd have been accessed down there and started something. But the politics now, there is no way. And I just see tonight that the Spitzers, have had a big blow. I went to college with Dell.
Dell?
Yeah, and his side of the family, Dell was a brother to John and Stuart, and the other one was killed in an airplane. But at any rate, now this Alan is the son of John, and that's where the Spitzer went. Dell just sold out to her.
Well, Dell's boy had something to do with the dealership.
Yeah, he worked for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I remember him.
And they all accumulated, on both sides of the family, accumulated stock.
Okay.
So all the other sides of the family sold their stock to the Allen side. So it's only now one Spitzer family, and that's John's, the offspring of John, which was Alan.
Okay.
And Alan and his family. And so that happened. When that happened, a lot of it happened because Dell felt real strongly that this Lorraine thing was a boomer. And way back, his name was George, I think, the old man. He always said, whatever you do, don't ever invest in Lorraine. And that has been a boomer for them ever since they put the money down there.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll always be a boomer, because I don't think, the way these people in Lorraine think, I don't think they'll ever get gambling down there, and that's the only thing that will make Lorraine.
Yeah, they ruined their waterfront. They sold that lakefront property, how many miles of it? It was in Black River Township. They let that railroad buy all that property.
Yeah.
You can't touch it. Can't go near it. Miles of it. Priceless. Resort. Priceless.
But
Rotten rails.
Yeah. You were born in, you've always lived in Amherst, haven't you?
yeah, I've been born right in Amherst Hospital and lived right here ever since.
In a hospital. That's kind of unusual for back then, too.
Well, yes and no.
Because back
Of
around
course,
those years,
in
everybody...
those days, my parents, it was getting pretty modern by 24 then. Yeah, Daddy put running water in here, and Daddy got a telephone. Then the Depression come and we didn't have a telephone.
Understand
And
that.
we didn't have a telephone then until 38 or 40.
Well, you really didn't need one because everybody
But
lived around you.
Norm's family, they were a little more wealthier than we.
I don't know about that.
We could have been, but Pa, he was an aggressor. He bought a new Cletrac tractor and went in debt. You know, he was a modern guy, and God damn.
So all he was doing was farming, and then he had, what, the market then, too, or...
No, he was farming, and we hauled the produce into Lakewood, and he set up that Lakewood market, and so forth. The whole thing kind of fell on flat when he passed away, because Pa would have brought the thing around. When the war hit, Pa would have probably been a general or some damn thing. He was on the ball. He was on the ball with guys like Fred Powers and Walter Nord. You know, he went to school with those guys too, and college with them. They were all had heads on their shoulders. They know which way the wind was blowing, and they know how to make it blow.
I wish I knew half what those men forgot.
Yeah. But that era there, when he passed away, he just passed at the wrong time.
What year was that?
It must have been 37.
37. Those were tough times back then.
Yeah, we didn't have a telephone, and we didn't have a lot of things, but we did have. We had running water, and Pa put in a bathtub, and
Well, at least you had the land, you grow your own food and stuff.
and oh yeah. They make, some people will tell you they make a big deal out of it. Big deal. I didn't know what the hell. Healthy, we were all healthy.
Still went down to the quarries, went skinny dipping, and went to school. And
I can maybe, I even have a faint recollection, you know, of what a depression, what the things were. The only thing I can remember is something like going to Cleveland and that Hilliard Boulevard half done, and name vents for engines. They were going this way and they were going out to Pepper Pike, and they got halfway and they went bankrupt. And then my Uncle Jack's, when I remember when it hit, and there was talk that he was going to lose, which he did, and Grandpa lost, Grandpa was president of American Shipbuilding Company, and Uncle Jack had the Penton Publishing Company. He started it along with, they were all engineers. And so what I remember about the thing is that I have faint recollections of them talking about problems, but I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, you were too young back then.
But now that I've grown up, I knew what happened. They lost their stock value, and they had to sell, and their stock became almost useless and stuff. And they hung on to some of it. Grandpa, Uncle Jack, hung on to a lot of stock that if we'd have kept it, but as young, the family got it. My mother didn't get it. So that was the end of the. But then and I was too young when Uncle Ed built the cantilever. But I remember him bringing the old cantilever wagons out here, with the Model T Ford engines, and I could tell you more. But and I wish someday that we can put all that together and show people those old things that Uncle Ed invented. He invented so much stuff. But this motorcycle thing was interesting because Pa, bought that 1914 Ike had. And the sad part about it burned up in the fire.
Yeah.
Otherwise we'd have had.
He told me a story about, was one of the Nords. They were in a play. Mr. Nord told me this. I think it was Evan was one Ike went to school with, wasn't it?
No, Ike went to school with Eric. Evan was younger.
Okay, so it was Eric.
Evan went to school with Ted.
All right, Eric and Ike were in a play, and they needed to get a pump for their prop. And it was your dad's 1914 Harley, and had that little luggage rack on the back, that steel luggage rack in one seat. Well, Mr. Nord's sitting on the back carrying that pump, and Ike's heading towards the Middle Ridge Railroad tracks. And he says, hang on. He says, how come? He says, there's no brakes on this thing. He said, what if there's a train? He says, I haven't thought of that yet. He says, they hit that thing like this. And Mr. Nord said he went to the bathroom at the school, pulled his pants down, and he had imprints, black and blue, with that luggage carrier. He says, that was my first and last motorcycle ride. That would have been about 1935.
You see, and for a long time, well, until he died, Grandpa, or my father, worked with Walter, on different things, and down at, you probably never heard the name Specialty Company?
Yeah.
Well, that's where they used to put, that's where Walter started, was in that Specialty Company, and it was just like our little old shop, and Daddy would go down there, and I'll never forget the night that I was down there, or daytime I was down there, and I was just a little guy. Daddy's in there monkeying around, running the machines or something with Walter, and I was outside playing, and a big dog come. Jesus Christ. I'll never forget, different things rise in here, and I can't get in the door. I'm too small to get in the door, and I'm screaming, and this dog's barking. I'll never forget that. At that old Specialty on Mill Street,
Yeah, I've seen pictures and heard stories of it.
And then...
Didn't they live right around the corner from there, the Nords?
Yeah, somewhere, I don't know.
It wasn't too far from there, they lived.
But for a long time, they lived on Spring Street. Right, that house, I think that house is gone now.
Torn down.
Yeah. And right next door to the schoolhouse. There was a little old schoolhouse there. I think they even took that schoolhouse out.
Yeah, that's the one they moved, right.
But at any rate, that was the relationship all during this time that Daddy had with Walter, see? So when the war came along, I could see that the two of them would have got cahoots together because they both had engineering, skills, and Daddy had the engineering skills, and they'd have put two and two together because Uncle Ed was an inventor too. He invented all landing lights for the Navy during the war, And that would have been my father's brother. He was he started out to be an electrical engineer out of Ohio State, you see, and so forth. But that war thing would have changed the whole aspect of this family and everything. I can see that right now. You see, Ike would have been able to finish school right there. You see, and Ike was sharp too.
Very.
See, he went to school with Eric Nord, and Frank Kodbach was 1 year ahead of him in school. See, that whole gang, you see. And there was a lot of potential there that was lost when Pa died.
Yeah. Yeah, because Ike became farmer.
It probably would have changed my life too. I don't know, because Dad was really influential. I mean, he got the whip out and so forth. And my screwing around of course, when I graduated, I'd gone into the service, so he wouldn't have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
Which part of service you go into?
Well, that story of that service was interesting. I started, first thing I could see, as soon as I got out of school, I was eligible for the draft.
That's high school?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I heard that if you sailed on the lakes, you could get it was a marine job, so I sailed on the Great Lakes here, and could get an exemption, because by that time, that was necessary, that shipping. So, man, it didn't take me long, and I think 2 weeks after that, I had my shipping papers, and I was on the CA Black, going up and down this. That, by August, that was getting hot. I mean, they were ready, if you didn't have some time on the lakes, and you were on your way to the draft.
Mm-hmm.
But then I heard all you got to do is go to War Shipping Administration in Cleveland, pick up some papers, and go salt. So the end of August, I went down and picked up shipping papers and went to salt. The first thing I got on was a coal boat going from Norfolk to Maine, Bath, Maine. I made two ships to that, and it was an old lake freighter, small lake freighter.
Oh, jeez. On the ocean.
That damn thing damn near sunk one night. And we'd go up in the gates, up through the Chesapeake Bay, then out, and then in and out of the gates all the way up to Maine. And
What year was that?
42?
yeah. And then by the time I got back, they said, hey, you can make good money. Get on a Liberty. I got on a Pulse. And I got on a Liberty ship, and the first goddamn thing went in a flotilla to Murmansk, Russia. Well, I lived through that damn thing. About half the ships got through, and I got back to the States after that one. And that was the end of that crap. I got on another ship. I said, it's better we go to the Mediterranean. So I got a ship to the Mediterranean. And when I got to the Mediterranean, well, it was just when they had taken the Anzio beachhead. And by that time they were shuttling stuff across from Algiers. So we unloaded in Algiers, and then we picked, they had taken North Africa, and then we were shuttled back and forth between Italy and Algiers. They broke us up, and then, believe it or not, the second shuttle, we go into Bari, Italy. The 12 days before we come into Bari, Italy, they had the biggest harbor bombing of World War, the second largest of World War II. And That was the Brindisi, that was in Bari, Italy. And they sank 22 ships in that harbor.
Those harbors were congested too, where you had to kind of wait your
you
turn.
tell me about it. You tell me about it.
I have an uncle that
I
was,
tell you, there was bodies floating around in that bullshit. When we went in, there was two little boats that moved bodies aside so we could get in, and they were picking up bodies and all that mess. And what happened there, see, it's right across from Yugoslavia, and the Jerrys, you know, were stationed in Yugoslavia, and they just came over in one night about 4 in the morning, and that was doomsday. But and then I went back to the States, and I hadn't written home or anything. And I said, well, I'm going home. You can believe it or not, but I got in up here, and about 2 hours after I was home, I had a telephone call from the FBI. He said, we understand that you're coming to Cleveland, that you have been evading the draft. So I went into Cleveland, took my papers. They said, no, my
Merchant Marine?
Merchant Marine
Right.
war shipping papers.
Mm-hmm.
They said, no, you're eligible. We have nothing on you at all. We've been misinformed. But we would advise you to report to your draft board. So I went to the draft board then. That Sadie Dick over there, I'll never forget that. She sat there in front of the group. There were 3 of them. Now, Sadie Dick was the head of the draft board over there. And she told these Mr. So-and-so and so, this Penton family has avoided the draft. You know, Hank had a clubfoot. Ted had one eye. Ike was a fireman.
Ike was in the Army before the war started. He was in National Guard.
Yeah, he was in the National
And
Guard.
then they told him, you gotta go home and run your farm.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so he got pulled out of the service.
And he didn't graduate from college then. He was only I think he was about a junior or something. And
Yeah, because he was in the motorcycle signal corps.
oh yeah,
He was on an Indian. He
Wow.
rode an Indian.
yeah.
He loved it.
So
yeah.
then when I got home, they drafted me into the Navy. And then when I got in the Navy, they sent me down to Virginia for boot, and I ended up in amphibious force. Then they sent me to San Pedro, and we shitted around there for a long, long time. Maybe 2 months waiting for a ship. In LSM 449. I helped build the thing. We shipped out of there, took it on its maiden voyage down to San Diego and then back to Frisco, and shipped out of there. There were, on the LSM 449, there were 54 people, sailors. We had an ensign for captain, and we started across that ocean. And he didn't know for nothing.
These things
Wow.
have flat bottoms.
My dad was on an LSM.
LSM?
Yeah, in the Pacific. Yeah, he told.
Well, then him and I would.
Oh, you could. Oh, yeah, you know.
He'll tell you all night long. Boom.
Yep. You get those rough seas. Yep.
Boom. And then, you know, a lot of times if the sea was just a little bit, you know, you could change your course and roll with it. But even on a roll, you roll like hell, see, with no draft.
Yep.
I'll never forget that.
Everything I was on was deep draft.
Jesus.
I was lucky.
And so, you know, one of the things that was good about the thing was, in the end, when 50% over, I would say 70% of the guys when we went out of Frisco were seasick. Hey, I can find, there's still a lot of those guys alive. You know, and I can
Yep.
get everyone for a witness to this, that they were all seasick. Jesus Christ, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that till we got to Honolulu. That was, and then we made it across. We made it across, and the last, the last thing that I was involved with was Okinawa, and and so forth. But if your dad was on an LSM, he can tell the stories too about Okinawa, because the LSMs came a little. They were a little after the LCIs and that, you know. They were the intermediate thing. But when we got over there, well, we secured Okinawa. At that time, then, we were ordered, nobody knew this, we were ordered in a flotilla. There must have been a flotilla of us, about 50 ships headed for and we were to pick up more ships, meet us for Korea. And we were just, I would say, we're abreast Japan when they dropped that bomb. And we went on up. We still stayed in that flotilla, and I think we rested. We laid off in a flotilla, floating around for maybe about 4 or 5 days. And then we had news that the bomb had been dropped. Then we had news that the Japs surrendered. And then they ordered us in, and maybe your dad could have been in that flotilla, but they ordered us up to Korea. In Korea...
He wasn't in Korea. He went to Borneo, I know, once or twice or whatever, different areas. But his, I think his captain was in charge of some of the flotillas, and so he was this secretary.
But at any rate,
he was a yeoman. He fought the war on a typewriter.
That's right.
When we went into Korea, and Korea has a tidal or a tide of about 25, 26 feet.
Pusan Harbor, you been in there?
Yeah.
That's where we were too.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, you could, and I run boats from our ship in.
Yeah.
You go in there at one time and you're about level. You go in there the next time and you got guys heading up a ladder.
But when we first went in, we went into a Jensen, which they had a tidal basin. And the tidal basin is, when the tide's up, you see, it's a big basin. Oh hell, I would say that thing, our ship was 150, I'd say the tidal basin is maybe as long as a football field and as wide as a football field. And you go in and they close the locks, you see, and the tide goes out, and then when the tide comes in, you go out. So that was the first landing. I was on the first ship for the first landing in Korea, and we went in this tidal basin. And the reason it was an LSM could just get through the locks, man, there wasn't more than maybe a foot on each side of those locks. And
no tug assist on that? They didn't tow you in? You went on your own power?
We went on our own power.
And that guy was an ensign?
And
he should have been a captain after that.
And at the same time, well, when we went in and we secured on the dock, and here was all the officers and everything from the Japanese. They had their geisha girls and the whole 9 yards. And then we used to shuttle back and forth from the PA ships back in there for about 6 months. Jesus Christ. And everything went wrong on that damn scow. The heating and the circulating pumps on the diesels, and I was down there packing around the dams. Just never could believe what we went through, shuttling back and forth and trying to stay warm. And it never, in Jensen or that part of the harbor, that part of the Korea, it never got stinking cold. I mean, 0 and all
It was
that.
damp cold, like 30.
Damp, 30.
Yep.
It'd get down maybe what we'd call maybe we would call it I'd say maybe 20 degrees or 15 degrees, damp, damp, damp. And we lived through that through the winter.
By the ocean, yeah.
And then finally, come spring, and it got out of that mess and came back to Manila, and then they had a whole bunch of LCIs in Manila, and they had no motor machinist mates to get them back. And those LCIs had quads on them. They had, damnedest thing, they had eight General Motors, I forget the numbers, the sizes, in a quad here and a quad here.
Did they have them for backup?
No,
They
no.
run them both. They run
them both, and half the time you didn't know which engine they're running or not. The only way you could tell is look at the gauges and the heat exchangers.
Count your revolutions on the screws, huh?
And more problems with them. And so I bargained that I'd get out of the Navy earlier if I would take one and go back, get it back to the States. And boy, I'll tell you, when we hit San Diego, man, I figured this is it. And I'll be a son of a bitch. You know what happened then? They ordered it on to Norfolk.
So you went around the Horn?
No,
Or through the canal?
Mm-hmm.
So that was another venture. More trouble with those things. I'll never forget everything that could go wrong. But I think we had about 2 engines. We didn't have more than 2 engines on each quad anymore running when we got into Norfolk.
How many screws were on those? How many?
Just 2 screws.
2 screws.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody must save some of those for old time's sake, you know.
Yeah. Amazing.
But it was really a deal.
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time over in Korea and
But we were in Naha in the Naha Harbor. That was after we secured it. We basically had everything secured, and they ordered. And then along comes a typhoon. I'll never forget that. So naturally, you get orders out of port. We didn't have any. We had a radar, you know. How far as, never forget that in the storm. I went up in the helm, you know. You always voice down, how far is land radar? How far is land radar? 400 yards or this or that, how far? This went on for a couple hours, and all at once, crunch, crunch, crunch.
Oh no.
We were aground. We were aground for 48 hours. We couldn't get off that son of a bitch. No way.
Tried Sally ship or anything?
Evidently we went on and preached about high tide, you know.
Yeah.
Because when the tide went off, Christ, for 48, for all day long, we were sitting there. That was a real experience, because when the tide went off, we were sitting on coral reefs. And those coral reefs all had big, long cracks and everything in them, you know, and deep. And we would get down, and the water was clear like you couldn't believe it. Get down and swimming under the water, down in those coral reefs. I'll never forget that. More goddamn experiences. And this island, we didn't know anything about it. You know, if you get out there, there's a billion islands out there. We didn't know whether the Japs were holding it or nothing. So all night long we had to stand watch. In the daytime, you know, and so forth, where you could see, you didn't have much watch because you could see, hell, it was at least quarter mile to land, you know, when the tide was out. But at night, when the tide was in, you know, we didn't know whether it was Japs on the land or anything. And our radar, you know, was, damn, I have a wrench in my pocket. And our radar, or I mean, our radar couldn't pick up people in the water and that. You know, we were lucky to
Pretty primitive.
Primitive,
Yeah.
see? So we stood watch all night long. I'll never forget that for 2 nights. But then a Navy tug came out. Christ, they must have stretched out. They must have stretched out, I don't know, I'd say a couple of hundred, 300 or 400 feet of cable got us off of there at high tide.
Yeah, those Navy seagoing tugs were powerful.
But that all happened before they dropped the bomb. That was right before they dropped the bomb. They can say what they want, but whoever, and it was Truman, I guess, or said drop the bomb, and that was the right decision.
You know, that bomb was about as big as this car, the size of that first atomic bomb.
Is that right?
Almost.
Yeah.
I've seen a replica of it.
Huge.
But
They get it down at the air.
4,000 pounds?
I think they have a Air Force museum.
Yeah, they're the same.
Yeah, little things.
No, yeah, the thing it was that if they hadn't dropped the bomb, you'd had to eventually invade Japan.
Yeah, that would have been nasty.
And they had made up their mind that they weren't going to be invaded any more than Okinawa or anything else. So it would have been a bloody battle any way you looked at it. There'd have been many Jap lives killed and many bombs all over Japan instead of just that one bomb.
2 bombs.
Nagasaki and
Hiroshima.
Yep.
So
Well, we're gonna let this guy
and
wrap up here.
Yeah.
but they
Appreciate your time, John.
but getting back to the motorcycle thing, it's always been good to me. Contrary to anybody's belief, I've had a good life, and I never did make had a lot of opportunities to make money.
When was the first time you rode a bike? Motorcycle.
Well,
Is that when you stole Ted's bike?
yeah, I remember Elmer Riker and I used to steal Ike's bike, push it out,
How old were you at that time?
Then after I came home from the service, I didn't have a bike yet, so I rode Ike's bike, And you see Faye Van Nuys, see me a picture of.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, I always honked around on Ike's bike at that time. No, I think I did. No, that was Ted. By that time, Ted had a bike.
Yeah.
And when I got out of the service, I couldn't buy a bike, so Jack, hell, that's another story. I had $100 in those days was a lot of money. I had $100 up at Defiance, Ohio, and I had $100 with Wig, $100 in Cleveland for a new Harley. But you had to know somebody to get a Harley.
Right.
See. So Bob McCann had an old, all in pieces, had a 1940 61 Harley. And I brought that out here and put it together. As a matter of fact, he gave it to me for $50. And I put it together, and I rode that in the first year at Jack Pine in 46.
Jesus.
In 46.
Oh, wow.
Then in 47, I rode again, and that's the year Bill went a lot farther. And then I saw these German English bikes, and Ablabard come through with a BSA, and Earl Flanders on a matchless. And I said, boy, and he won it. Ablabard won it. Because the story, this is a story that's unbelievable to most motorcyclists. In those days, they said, all bikes had big tires in the front. And those skinny tires, they couldn't, well, how are they going to get through the sand and everything, you see? So when these bikes came through to ride Jack Pine from California, they'd been riding the desert in the sand. Ablabard was a famous rider. He won Big Bear one time. And Earl Flanders, was a good rider. And all those Bud Eakins and all those guys, when they came through and they won Jack Pine, then everybody's eyes, including my own, said, hey, you don't need a great big tire on the front of these things, you know?
21-inch skinny.
21-inch skinny.
BSA come right from the factory with them.
Yeah. No, yes, the BSA did. But the Husqvarna never came through. They came through with a 19-inch. And so then I went on a BSA, and believe it or not, the first year that I got on a BSA, I missed winning Jack Pine by 1 point. Bert Cummings beat me.
But you won open class.
Oh, yeah.
You took first in open class.
Yeah. And then I took first in open class probably I never counted them, 6 or 7 times until 1958. And then I won my first Jack Pine. 59 I won the Jack Pine.
Went on NSU?
Yeah.
In 58.
Yeah.
That's when you switched from BSA to NSU.
That's right. But Brother Bill won Jack Pine on a BSA in 55. And
Wasn't that alloy
so,
clipper?
basically, if you get the story, that led me up to building the bike. Because you couldn't believe what we did to win that Jack Pine. We spent nights and days and everything else because we had to work to make a living, you know. But we spent nights and days with ideas trying to figure out, build some crazy fenders and everything and we were able to win where we gained ideas. And then by the time it came time for me in the mid-60s, you say, well, hell, we're doing all this. Maybe, here's some ideas to build a bike. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And the ideas that came through after that were crazy because I never patented it. We didn't have any money and patenting. Geez, when those guys started the folding shift levers and all of that kind of stuff.
You guys did all of that.
Yeah.
Folding foot pegs. All the foot pegs were rigid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you something? What got you started in off-road competition and stuff? Who or what?
That when we were going to Ball and Wallace, Bill and I rode bikes back and forth, and we'd stop at the Harley shop over there, and before that we had echoes that people would tell us, like Uncle Ike would say something about Jack Pine or this or that. We never knew. We'd always get the motorcycle magazine, and Bill and I'd read it. And we'd show Slug or show Ted, hell, why don't you guys do that, you know? So, we're going to ride Jack Pine, Bill and I. And so that's how we started. And then...
And the ride that you rode your bikes up there, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, who was Slug?
Ted. NSU, and George Bliss and I forget who the other one was, we headed out for Daytona. And I had gripper tire on the back and all the luggage that our paraphernalia. We didn't have a caravan following us. And we rode down to the Stone Mountain. And I rode the Stone Mountain and won the Stone Mountain on that NSU. We got there, took the trophy and everything, buttoned on, and went down to Daytona. And we camped out too. We didn't have any money to speak of. We camped out. I rode the Alligator and won the Alligator. Put all of that paraphernalia on the bike, strapped it all over, and rode those bikes home. And when we left here, we got down in mid-Ohio, I think about as far as Coshocton or someplace down there, and it was 9 degrees.
Isn't that when you had to blow on your carburetor to thaw it out?
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
But when we had got back, it was moderate weather again. I mean, it just, that much change. All right, then it comes Little Burr time, and I got on that NSU, rode to Little Burr, and that was the first year I won Little Burr too.
Was that a 250?
No,
175.
175.
175.
And
And rode it home.
NSU.
Rode it home, and on a Sunday night, I rode that thing home, and on a Monday morning, I got on my BMW R69, rode it to New York, slept overnight, got a good night's sleep, and slept late in the day, and on Wednesday and on Tuesday night, and it was midnight Tuesday or in the beginning of Wednesday, got on that BMW and rode to California. And set that transcontinental
52
record.
hours?
52 hours.
And there weren't highways like they got today.
No freeways.
Nope.
And of course, then, I think I've told him the story to the family today. When I got out there, I stayed with a friend that I had sold a matchless to here. No, AJS, Bob Hokendale. I sold a matchless to Bob Hokendale, who was in advertising over at the Chronicle Telegram. Then he moved to California, and Bob was a real talker. You know, he always hung around Ernst's shop too. Yeah, and he was a real talker, and don't you know, he talked himself into the head of the advertising department of Riverside Daily Press, right beside Skip Fordyce's shop out there. And Skip Fordyce was a big dealer in Riverside who put Brad Andres on the bikes and some of these other champions. So Bob, he's a big flat tracker, you know. He first started on this AGS, but then he went over to Skip, and big talker again, and he talked Skip into using Brad's old machines, and he would race at Ascot on that. So after I stopped, and I knew him well, I knew the family well, and so after I stopped or set the transcontinental record, well, I was tired, so I stayed at his house. He said, come on over and stay in Alhambra. So I stayed there for a week. And we sat there drinking beer and bull crapping and everything and smoking cigarettes. And I said, Hokey, we always called him Hokey, why in the hell don't you quit this racing business? Every Friday night or so he'd race at Ascot. Ascot was a big deal in those days. Man, they were just racing like hell and killing them left and right. You know. And
Was he doing any good?
Huh? No,
No?
Hokey couldn't race.
He just having fun.
He
Okay.
was having fun. And so I said, Hokey, and Donna, you can go up and ask her. I mean, it's got a lot of witnesses to this. And he says, what the hell, John? I killed myself. You come and get Donna and take the kids and go back to Ohio and live happily ever after on Social Security. 1 month later, he was dead. Killed at Ascot.
Yeah, weird.
And 1 year later, I married Donna. And that gave me 6 kids then, see.
You know, Laura was a year older than me, Pocono. And then Barb was 2 years younger.
Yeah.
And then Brad, how old was Brad?
Brad was a couple years young. Well, Brad was younger.
He was Tim's age, about, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Tim's
Brad.
age.
Well,
A couple years different.
No, Brad was, I would say, a couple years younger than Barbara.
Okay.
But at the same time, then Brad, fell at school and was on the monkey bars, and then Tim was born in '60,
Okay.
and so forth, and then Tim is between Don and I,
Mm-hmm.
you see. But everything worked out and so forth. But that was a coincidence. I had a lot of coincidence breaks, and guys, I'll never forget the time we and I told you about Mediterranean when I was shoveling back and forth.
Mhm.
Guys picked up Mac McKenzie. Never forget that. Man, I'll bet we looked at each other for an hour in that galley before Mac was the first one. He says, I know you, don't Yeah, I don't know you. Christ, he had a beard like something you couldn't believe, you know. He says, Mac McKinney. I said, Jesus Christ. I went to school with him 12 years. And picked him up. He had had a ship shot out from under. We picked him up out of lifeboat.
His mom and dad that owned the store in town, was that the?
Mackenzie, yeah, Mrs. Mackenzie was up there for years.
Right.
And the father, I guess, whether divorced, maybe he was killed, I don't know. But Mac was killed, hit the tree up in front of Coctonics here. And
That was
dead
Margaret. Margaret was his mom.
Yeah, Margaret was his mother. She was a real neat
Nice
lady.
lady, yeah. She
You
good
know.
friends with Grandma Miller.
But I can tell you coincidences, that things like that happened to me all during my lifetime.
Yeah.
But
I'd like to know your guardian angel.
Well, things are just meant to be that way.
That's it.
Yeah.
yeah. But that's how I got started, this motorcycle thing. And Mom, you know, in the end, my mother, she was real well versed on the world, because we had every National Geographic that ever was born since 1917 or something, you know. And she went through those left and right. When we started to go to Europe, she was still pretty active, and she would go with us. But always before that, you know, she'd say, if Pa would have jumped that damn motorcycle, you know, that's the 14 that I started, if he'd have jumped that motorcycle, then you children wouldn't have gotten all wound up in this motorcycle thing. But she was proud of us when we ended up, because she traveled with us. Man, she used to go to, remember we'd go to Daytona, we'd stop in Dalton or up in the northern end that woman would go out on the run, you know, at a check or something. And she had a natural for, you'd find her sitting on a porch with a bunch of those hillbillies and black people and that and everything. She was a natural for people, you know. It was her life.
I know she and my Grandma Powers were very good friends.
Oh yeah.
And they were in a study club.
Well, yeah.
And they would
Mrs. Westbecker and
Yeah.
Mrs. Nord.
and they would study events of the world. I mean, these people were the most well-read people that you'd ever want to talk. I was telling him about your mama on the way over. I said her penmanship.
Yeah.
She wrote like an English teacher. I mean, her penmanship was all. Even when she was an older woman, whenever she wrote a note to Mom or Grandma or somebody, you know, and they said, "Oh, this is from Mrs. Penton." I looked how neat her writing always was, and very brilliant woman.
Those people were brought up so much differently than we are today, you see. And they depended on the reading and the writing, you know, and that was their study. And it seems like when you do that, your mind gets more thorough in remembering, you know, and so forth. Because they would write, she would write and write, and you know who takes it, her penmanship isn't there, but Mary takes after that.
Oh, really?
Oh, Jesus. She isn't on the internet or nothing. She writes and writes and writes and, you know, corresponds all the time and so forth. And Pat used to, but she's so busy writing
She's on
herself now.
computers now.
Yeah.
Everything's on a computer.
She had to.
Yeah, couldn't keep up.
And as a matter of fact, Pat's thing is on the internet now. You know that.
Yeah. that's
Her
neat.
articles are.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That's neat.
So.
And these are sisters, Pat and Mary.
Mhm.
Pat Linebaugh and Mary Kovach. All good friends of the family.
They got all these names, you know, it's hard to keep track of all of them, yeah.
Well, I'll interject if I.
Okay.
So. I gotta look at some of these boxes here. Over here. Someplace I have them all over, but sometime if you're ever interested in Pat's writing, I've got a book, boy, I'll tell you,
Well, touch of blue denim?
well, that and,
I think they're in a box up there. I think on the way up to the top of the ladder, there's some hardbound books.
Always,
That be, I mean,
no, well, it might, take a look and see if there's, denim is up there, or a bittersweet, or,
I've got one of each signed by the author.
someplace, I know I have,
Yeah, thread of blue denim.
there's another one.
Blue denim. Turn around here.
Take and bring that denim down.
You want this box? There's about 4 or 5 of them in here.
No, leave it up there, then I'll... Things in, that she writes about in the family growing up in parts of those.
I've got an article at
I
the
think
house.
she even tells articles about her and Bill and I trapping muskrats and everything else.
I've got an article at the house that was one of my favorites. Ted and I were good friends because he and I worked nights for him. I get done working my 8 hours and I put in another 4 or 5 for Ted, and then we drink for 4 or 5 after that, you know. That's another story. But it's the hobo and the hippie. When he took that flight, forget where, out to California or somewhere they were going, and he was forced to sit by this hippie. And he raised such a fuss with the stewardess, he ended up sitting with her. And it's just a neat story the way Pat wrote it. That was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
He was a corker.
Well, that, I suppose if God had kept all the history of everything, Pat, some of them say, well, you ought to put it all together and we'll edit it for you and you'll write a book or something. But
That'd be a good one.
Yeah.
the photos I have are all in my mind.
Well, Jackie's got that other box that's got the BSA and the NSU pictures in it. He's got to have that.
Well, I'm sure he did.
'Cause that
And
was-
he took that because he wanted to put something together along the lines of, with the KTM motorcycle.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We'll check with Jackie so we can get some copies.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll take some time. We'll get this stuff all organized.
But the other interesting thing is, so many of the riders, and I don't know why, I suppose the riders, you can take Burleson, and I forget half of them, that we were affiliated with, even as much as the guy that the professor that lays out the motocross, what was his name?
Gary Bailey.
Gary Bailey, you know. Gary Bailey wrote, that's how, one of the ways that he was able to end up, he lived out here for about a year or so, camped out here in his camper. Remember that?
Yeah.
And he worked at a grocery store in San Diego, I guess, or someplace out there. He started to ride a Penton. Then he finally, when he started, then he rode a Botaco. And Gary rode a Botaco for years. As a matter of fact, he was riding Botaco, I think, when he came through here.
I remember when you had a observed trial school out here,
Yeah,
and you brought in Mick Andrews,
that's right.
or behind my house
Yeah.
is where he wrote. This guy was unbelievable what he could do. Now he was an OSA rider. He always rode OSA.
Yeah.
God, and see, John would bring these people around, and we benefited from their knowledge and what have you, and skills.
All those guys, Roger DaCosta, monkeyed around with him and had him riding boat.
Well, you had Torsten
Torsten
Hallman.
Hallman and Lars Larson. Lars is still an active rider, you know that?
Is that right?
Yeah. For fun, you know, and his son got pretty good at motocrossing, and then he somehow he hurt his hand and he never got the grip back to it, so forth. But
Yeah, that was quite a living history with motorcycles to live in this area through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was.
And when some of that was going on, we'd later enduro run all the way through around here. Of course, this wasn't built up and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But Jack has told me now, there's nowhere where in Western Europe that you can have a enduro run anymore.
It's all built up?
6 days.
It's all built up?
It's all government put an end to it all. It's built up and privately owned. The rest is government. So
Wow.
that's why Jack went over to see what this ALBA program was, because that's going to be in the States one of these times. You see, it'll be the enduro riding in the States is going to disappear too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it happening just with the urban sprawl. It's just killing a lot of things.
That's why they had to have 6 days on that Millionaires Oklahoma ranch,
That's right.
because there's nowhere to have it.
So that, and I just talked to him and I said, well, what? And he explained that this guy in Elba, in the off season, he knows everybody on the island, you know, and he has these programs. He takes so many riders down, and I think they go over 20 weeks, and then Elba is a vacation, recreational island, and that's where the millionaires and everything comes. He says, so during this time you can ride. And I said, well, what's the terrain like? It's all rock.
Oh, perfect.
I hated it. I hated those runs in Italy like something you couldn't believe. Is it any wonder? And you know, the Italians just love it. They're brought up on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's why the 6 days this last year, the Italians won everything. And
It's all rock from what I heard.
Huh?
It's all rock.
It's all, oh yeah.
That's why the Ohio boys used to beat up the California riders in this area with the enduros, because they couldn't deal with the mud.
Yeah.
They could handle sand, they couldn't handle mud.
That's right. Well, that's it, fellas.
We appreciate your time, John.
Oh,
Got some
well.
of these pictures ID'd, and I'll get a copy of this and get this back.
I can find some more. I'll ask Jack. And I'm
Jack
sure
must have the NSU and BSA pictures, because there
was a lot of those.
What's it? You had that one with Tobacco River crossing,
Yeah.
where you guys were about this high in water, and those old beezers were just chugging right through there. Air stack coming up off the front of the tank on Bill's bike. I think that was a picture of technology in its infancy.
Yeah.
I was lucky, see, I came in an era where they could rebuild my body, you know, and sit here in comfort. That's neat.
Yeah, you weren't in comfort a year ago,
God.
from what I hear.
No.
Exactly a year ago, you were hunched over in pain. Like, no, you were going through the operation about this time, weren't you?
Yeah.
No, I was out of the operation. This time, I was out a month now. So, and you know, I was out of the pain. After the operation, that was the end. 3 weeks after that, I haven't taken a pain pill, an actual pain pill, after 3 weeks out. The only thing I got tangled up in the pills was trying to sleep. And I'd never experienced that in my life. Boy, now I've got things back in normal, but God damn it, I don't know what was going on, but I sure had the problem sleeping.